Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in with you again tonight. Seems like an eternity since last time. Quote, but we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. End quote. John F. Kennedy. I'm not sure that was a good thing to say. You know, remember Voltaire? We talked about him last week. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Now, our next guest, I'm delighted to report, this old Indian named R.W. Sanders. I was talking to him the other day, and he goes, you know what, you need to talk to Richard Hoagland immediately. I said, okay, well, call him and hook us up. And so he did. And Richard Hoagland is next. Please stand by. We're going to discuss all things Martian and this torsion thing that I don't understand, but Richard does, and he'll make it easy for us too, with any luck, right here on Coast to Coast AM. Well, you all know Richard Hoagland. If you do not, he's a former Space Science Museum curator, a former NASA consultant, and during the historic Apollo missions to the moon was science advisor to Walter Cronkite himself and CBS News. For over 20 years, Richard Hoagland has been leading an outside scientific team in a critically acclaimed independent analysis of possible intelligently designed artifacts on Mars. Welcome, Richard Hoagland. I think our chat together is long overdue, and I'm glad to have you here. I don't know how that happened, but, you know, everybody else got to talk to you but me.
Hey, John, timing is everything. As I said last night, I've been looking forward to quite a while for the Enterprise docking with the mothership, and it has now occurred.
Docking has occurred. Docking is complete. I saw your photographs.
Oh,
unbelievable stuff. Undeniable that just doesn't look normal. That doesn't look like any kind of naturally occurring stuff up there at all.
We're talking the stuff on Mars, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, the timing on what is going on behind the scenes is so weird. And we're on this countdown to NASA's big announcement on Monday afternoon at the AGU meeting up in San Francisco, which has had a lot of weird stuff going on also behind the scenes. You know, you heard that the project scientist from Curiosity talked to this reporter for NPR and said that they had found something in the soil, in the sand, when they did their first analysis a couple, 3 weeks ago, that was going to make the history books. And then he used the words earth-shaking.
Yeah.
And a NASA PR guy told Space.com on Friday, I guess, yesterday, there's nothing going to happen. We didn't find organics, didn't find anything. It's all, in other words, there's a cover-up. Can you spell cover-up, folks?
I can even say it 10 times.
Now, what's really weird and exquisite, apparently in honor of your show tonight, John, NASA has just released some stunning high-resolution images from Curiosity from what's called the Mastcam 100 camera.
Yes.
This is a 100-millimeter lens, which is kind of like a telephoto. It's got CCD imaging technology in the camera, which is high signal to noise. They have just posted some of these raw images on the NASA website, and one of my guys downloaded it. He's been looking, for the last couple of days for this, sent it to me, and I've been looking at it. This is going to blow you away because we have crystal clear images now of what I talked to George about the other night, these apartments on Mars that are sticking out of the canyon sidewalls because they're being eroded out after being buried by the catastrophe millions of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Crystal clear. So what I'm going to do in the break is I'm going to send you and Lex a copy directly from the NASA website. Do you have a browser, a viewer, some kind of imaging program?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what you want to do is to take it from the email, put it into that imaging program, and blow it up to like 150%. I will not send you the enhanced version because you'd lose all your socks tonight and you'll be able to do the rest of the show. I will send you the normal version before we, do little tweaks and bells and whistles to bring out all the detail. This is architecture. These are ruins. This is an ancient civilization, millions of years old, that they have chosen tonight to release unequivocal evidence, except for the raving skeptics who are religious nuts, and they'll never agree that what we're seeing is not rocks. I just sent it to an engineer friend of mine who's a construction engineer, and his one word was yikes.
Yes.
There is no doubt. And I sent you all that other junk that they've been photographing over the last several weeks as they're rolling along toward this place called Glenelg.
Yes.
This is a creeping disclosure mission. The Curiosity mission, as I have put it together now, has two purposes. One is to do the public PR stuff, water, rocks, ancient history, geology, the safe stuff, the stuff that NASA's built their rep on for the last 50 years. Its secret mission going on in parallel is to nail down finally with a spacecraft that is loaded with all the right instrumentation to unequivocally give us 100% confidence level information as to what's there. That we're looking at an ancient civilization on Mars of incredible power and majesty and omnipotence and sweep and scope and grandeur all across the solar system, which meant a horrible end about 65 million years ago when a whole planet blew up in its front yard and destroyed almost everybody. And this is the time. This is the 2012 date. This is what the Mayans have been talking about. And everybody, of course, has gotten the fear porn email and not the real message, which is this is disclosure with a capital D, to where just before the end of this year, the end of the Baktun, the end of 2012, some astonishing things are being released for those who have eyes.
What are the ramifications for, or maybe even the consequences for, we Earthlings if a sufficient number of people decide, yes, this is pretty much irrefutable. We're going to go ahead. We believe it. We don't think it's phony. We don't think it's doctored. I mean,
well, if I'm sending you a link directly from the JPL NASA website, and every one of the millions of people listening to us right now live across the world can go to that web link and download the live image from NASA, how can it be hoax? That's the first thing. We get rid of that nonsense.
Well, what I mean is what's going to happen to the collective, just to use hippie-esque language, what's going to happen to the collective head trip of the Earthling?
Well, it's time for us to graduate. There's so many people who know this. I mean, look at all the polls. There are people, I remember the numbers here correctly. When Gallup did a poll, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, when Bush was trying to privatize Social Security, and Gallup asked them if they believed that they would have Social Security when they retired, more people said they believed in UFOs than believed that they would be able to retire on Social Security.
Probably more people believe pigs can fly than that they're going to get their Social Security, but I get you.
The point is that we are so far ahead of the, quote, authority figures and the experts and the politicians and the people who run society. And I was listening to your interview in the previous hour, the banksters, my friend Joseph Farrell's wonderful word, which is a combination of bankers and gangsters.
Yep.
The banksters run the world. Well, their days are numbered. And the reason that there has been such an incredible delay in releasing the information that we're going to talk about tonight is because it's the game changer. It's going to change the world. It's going to do all the grassroots things that those in power are terrified, and that's why you have this idiotic NASA press release saying, oh, there's nothing going to be announced, move along, nothing to see. I mean, John Grotzinger, who's the project scientist of the Curiosity mission, is not an idiot. He would not have sat down with an NPR reporter and leaked this teasing story if he himself didn't realize that unless he got the word out by the time they got to the meeting, somebody would show up and say, you're not going to talk about what you think you're going to talk about. That happened years ago in Italy at a conference that my friend Paolo, I can't remember her last name, having a mind blank here.
Sorry.
She went, she's a reporter. I've had her on Coast, introduced her to George, and he's had her on many, many times. And she went to this meeting where Formisano, this Italian scientist, had basically from the Mars Express mission, the ESA mission, orbiting Mars back in 2003, had found methane and ammonia in the atmosphere of Mars. Well, those are the indicators of life. Most of the methane in the Earth's atmosphere now comes from cows doing things we can't talk about on the live radio.
Right.
There are no cows on Mars, but if there are organisms like microbes, anaerobic bacteria, for instance, they can emit lots and lots of methane. Formisano told her in a jewelry store where she cornered him the night before the meeting, I'm going to announce this tomorrow. She had an incredible scoop. The next day when they had the meeting, Formisano was sitting on one side of the conference hall, and all the NASA people are sitting on the other side, and when he gets up to make his presentation, he doesn't say a damn word about what he told Paula.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is he got squashed. And this community, this planetary science community of scientists that kind of run and participate in these missions, be they Russians or Japanese or European or NASA or American, whatever, they all know each other. It's a very small club. It's probably maybe 200-300 people tops. So what happened to Formisano quickly made the rounds. And so the way I interpret what Grotzinger was doing is he was basically leaking so the press would build up this incredible head of steam and curiosity, pun intended, so that when he stands up there and his team at the AGU on Monday afternoon, the folks that want to keep whatever they're going to announce in a jar and lock it back up in the closet, they may not win. I mean, this is an inside war, and tonight the fact that this picture and a whole bunch of others that are of the complex surrounding it has been put live on the JPL website, the night that we're talking about this on Coast, which is the vanguard of freedom and truth and justice for getting at the truth in the American media. I mean, you realize how important you are in that chair, John?
I don't know it, but I sense it.
Well, you get the feedback. I'm sure you get the emails. And
yes, it's
what we've been doing.
Well, it's just completely obvious that, for example, let's go back a few years. I woke up at about 6:30 in the morning and saw those pictures coming in. It was Viking, wasn't it, that sent back the Cydonia pictures?
No, it wasn't Viking.
Voyager? Which one was it that took the face on?
The Viking orbit. Remember, our Viking was a mission with two parts. It was a lander and an orbiter. The lander landed in a totally nondescript place and photographed basically rocks.
All right, which one took the picture of the face?
It was the orbiter, the mothership.
Oh, gotcha.
Which was
well, that makes perfect sense.
On July 25th of 1976, it took the picture of Cydonia of the famous face on Mars. And that was, I think, a Sunday afternoon.
Wait a second. I'm way behind here, Richard. I mean, and I don't mind telling you because this is your thing. Your full immersion, as far as I'm concerned, you're the expert. In the 90s, we saw... Are you telling me that the pictures were taken in the 70s and we didn't see them until the 90s?
No. We saw them in the 70s, but they were dismissed as a trick of light and shadow.
Okay, gotcha. Now, which was the craft that took the good ones that CNN wrote?
It wasn't until the 90s when we started making a lot of fuss. I put up a website, the Enterprise Mission. I had people, Coast audience, inundating NASA headquarters with faxes. Secretaries would come in the next morning and they couldn't get into the offices because the fax machines had been spitting out paper all night long, demanding that the next mission going back, which was the Mars Surveyor mission, after 20 years after Viking, headed by Mike Malin, Mr. Cover-Up, that they take pictures of Cydonia, and NASA fought tooth and nail, gave every cockamamie excuse. I mean, I was arguing with the project scientist of Surveyor on Good Morning America when he told me flatly, we can't take pictures like that. Well, they had planned to photograph the Viking spacecraft, which are basically about the size of a washing machine, right?
Right.
From orbit. And you mean to tell me if you can target an object the size of a large couch, you can't target a structure a mile across? I mean,
Right.
their defensive posture and their inane, excuses simply made no sense. So ultimately, they caved, and they took new pictures. Mike Malin took new pictures under the worst possible angle, worst possible lighting, worst possible everything. And then NASA claimed, the whole thing had gone away. Well, no, it hadn't gone away. It was buried under a huge amount of disinformation as part of the ongoing cover-up.
Okay, so Viking 1 took those pictures originally, and then...
The orbiter, the orbiting component of the Viking mission.
Okay, and then from 97 to 2006, you had the Mars Global Surveyor, and it took and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Well, that's from 2006 later.
In the 2000s, we've had Mars Odyssey. We've had the MRO, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. But none of the recent missions has gone anywhere near Cydonia.
Well, this is what I'm getting at. Which one took the
original?
No, the ones that we saw in the 90s that CNN ran at 6:30 in the morning, and then they didn't run them again for 3 hours, and they were not the same pictures.
Because they were taken under, look, have somebody there in the studio turn out all the lights and take a flashlight and put it under your chin with all the lights out. Mm-hmm. Then have somebody else take a picture of you. Then post that picture on the web. Your grandmother won't be able to tell it's you.
Gotcha.
Malin took the picture of the face on Mars under the worst possible conditions to deliberately get the mainstream media, who aren't paying attention, to think, the whole thing is just a hoax and it went away. It's called disinformation. It's a CIA op, an NSA op. It's not truth, justice, and the American way. It's part of the control mechanism to keep us from knowing who we are, what we're doing in this place, how extraordinarily ancient the human race is, what astonishing things we used to do that we can do again if we want to. And, the way you keep people under wraps and under control is you completely cut them off from their heritage. And that's what's been done over the last 40 years.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so this is very interesting. So it appears that what we saw in the 90s, early in the morning, this was the same photograph, but it was just combined data combining data from the high-resolution stereo camera on the Mars Express probe and the Mars Orbiter camera, and that's what we saw back in the 90s?
No. What we saw was the black and white image taken at the lousiest sun angle and through fog. They actually waited for a day when they had fog to photograph from orbit, at a very oblique angle. Same structure, but because the lighting was so different. I mean, look, I live with a very beautiful woman. I don't know whether you know her, Dr. Robin Malkoff. A lot of times when you take a picture of Robin, she doesn't like it because the lighting is bad.
Oh, I've made some of the biggest mistakes in my life because of bad lighting.
So it was all in the lighting, and it was done by design. Now, as we got later missions, the Europeans, what's his name, Newmaker, at the German, Space Institute, he took pictures with Mars Express that are stunningly high-res, in color, showing details.
Okay.
And the same time those were taken, Malin came out with a U.S. version where he actually had a horn growing out of the middle of the face's forehead, made it look like a unicorn.
Okay, I got you. Let's take our little break here and then come right back with Richard Hoagland. This is great, Richard. It's great to have you on the show. This is Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. Yes, indeed. It looks pretty good out there tonight. It's been a kind of a ring around the moon the last couple of nights. Anyway, Richard Hoagland is with us tonight. I've been looking forward to this chat for a long time. I want to talk with him about Phobos and those pyramids up there and just every little thing that all things Martian. We've been captivated by the idea of being invaded from Mars. It's always Mars. And I remember one of the scariest movies I ever saw as a little kid was Invaders from Mars. Worst possible thing could happen, that Martians got a hold of this, the main star kid's dad, not from the stars, I mean the star of the movie. They had this little drill, they'd put a little RFID chip in the back of his head. I'm kidding you, something. They did something, did an implant and turned him into somebody that the kid didn't even recognize, which of course is quite a horrible scenario to have, one of the two most trusted people in your life turned into a complete stranger. So, and it appears that there's some activity, because I'm looking at these photographs now, and this stuff just doesn't really look normal. Hey, Richard, rather than go to another commercial break right now, why don't you just come right on back onto the bridge and let me ask you something.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff just scattered all over the place up there. And I mean, You look at this and it's undeniable. I mean, I don't know what it is. I can't pick it up and handle it, but it sure doesn't look like the rest of the stuff lying around there really stands out. All
right, let's kind of think about how you look at stuff like this. Well, I've been telling people for years that the way, and this is taken directly from my old friend Carl Sagan. Sagan said, I think it was Cosmos, written in 1971, when he was going across country from Caltech, JPL back to Boston, driving his yellow Porsche with the Phobos license plates, dictating his first book into a tape recorder so that his producer in New York, no one ever wrote a book that way. Carl was kind of, one of a kind. So he wrote his book by dictating into a tape recorder while his wife was holding the microphone and he was driving cross country. He said in Cosmos that intelligent life on Earth first manifests itself in the geometric regularity of its construction. When you look at nature and you look at the stuff that we make, intelligence, the incredible crucial difference is that our stuff is incredibly Euclideanly geometric. Right angles, straight lines, orthogonality, grids, geometry, symmetry. And nature is pretty, unless you get to biology, is pretty random. Rocks erode, the wind abrasion produces weird shapes. You have meandering rivers. You don't have the strict geometry that our intelligence produces. So Sagan, as a rule of thumb, said, by metonymy, if you're going to look for intelligence on another planet, you've got to basically use the rules that we know of, which is us. We have no other way to judge at the moment. And so what he did when we were able to launch our first satellites, the Tyros weather satellites with those crude black and white Vidicon lousy res images in the 1960s, one of the first projects that Sagan did as part of his looking for extraterrestrials, he analyzed thousands of these crummy NASA Tyros weather satellite images where you could even see the scan lines. They were that bad. And he only found a few examples from those crude spacecraft that were just a few hundred miles up that were kind of unmistakably of intelligent design. One was the Great Wall of China, and the other was a crisscross pattern of logging roads in a forest in Canada right after a snowfall, because the forest was dark, must have been really cold, and the snow didn't stick on the trees, on the leaves, on the branches. But the roads filled up with snow, and so they were white. It looked like a kind of a tic-tac-toe game where you have the lines at right angles.
Sure.
And that was geometry. So that's the rule of thumb. So when you look at this junk, and that's basically the way to term it, junk that Curiosity is photographing all across this Martian landscape, it's been driving across, since late August. It's the geometric stuff you want to look at. The right angles, the things with little grids inside, the spheres with obvious tubes, the symmetry. I mean, there's one thing there that kind of is canted at an angle. It's a dark structure against the russet, reddish desert background, tilted at an angle because one side of it's sitting on a rock, and it looks like a World War II turbo pump from a V-2 rocket. Now, that's not, I don't think, what it is. But it's got the symmetry of a pump, of a capstan, of in other words, you look for the geometry. We don't know what this stuff is. You're right. You can't pick it up yet and handle it, so you can't give it a name. But you can see that it's not normal rock stuff because of the symmetry, because of the design elements, because of the geometry. And that's the rule of thumb. When you're looking for natural stuff versus artificial stuff, look for the geometry. And there's tons of geometry in this stuff all across that damn landscape.
Every once in a while, Pundit will pick on me a little bit, and he'll say that I do coast to coast amen. But I have to toss this in. Isn't it interesting that those people way back when who wrote the first book of the Bible, the earth was without form.
Yep.
Meaning geometry was absent.
Yep.
Why would they include something like that? I mean, that's an absolute foundation. You just repeated it. Sagan said it.
Well, that gets into a long discussion that would make Ian very unhappy because I would go places that he was not willing to go. But I think, look, the Bible to me has always been a code. If you know the language, if you know the context, you read text one way. If you're coming at it brand new and you don't know what's been going on, the history, the genesis, pun intended, of it,
yeah,
you will read it another way.
Well, yeah, it'd be like reading Shakespeare for the first time, only harder.
If the Bible is really a textual narrative of a previous epoch of extraordinary capabilities for human being, closer to the angels than we are now.
Well, I wish I was quicker. I'd have written that down. That was great.
Then we can play the tape back.
Okay.
Then we will interpret it as something different than what it really is. And I think that's been going on for a very long time. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here.
That's okay. I'll tell you what, get a little glass of water and let's pick it up because I couldn't wait to get back to the conversation with you, so I'm going to take a little break now because we need to, and then we'll come right back. Is that all right?
Cool.
All right, good. This is Coast to Coast AM. Please stand by. John B. in with you for the Saturday Night Ride. Richard Hoagland, did you say those pictures were available at the JPL website or the NASA site, or both, maybe?
Well, the one I just got in, which is this complex we call the apartments, because they look basically like a bunch of linear condos with, concrete buttresses, horizontal windows, and they're all collapsed and ruined. You can see roofs collapse. You can see cornices on the ground. You can see lots of shattered masonry. But they look like architecture out of the 50s. If you would drive through the Southwest in the 50s, you'd pass these 50s motels on Route 66 that would look like some of this architecture. It's bizarre. It's eerie. Look, let's do this. For people who cannot imagine what we're talking about, what I did tonight with a friend of mine named Tim Crawford and another friend of mine named Sean Ladesseur is we set up some web links to take you to a video presentation I did at the Conscious Life Expo just a couple, 3 weeks ago where I showed some of this amazing set of artifacts. And what you do is you go to enterprisemission.com, and you click on the video panels at the top of the page, which will take you to a thing called NASA Flicks. And there you can see the Curiosity stealth mission. It's a 90-minute presentation with a lot of this imagery that I prepared for the Conscious Life people. And if you go to Coast and you click on my name, follow the links there, it takes you to a page that Sean set up, and at the bottom of that page, there's a link that takes you directly to the same NASA Flicks YouTube page, which allows you to see the same presentation of this data. Now, what we're going to do over the next couple of days, now that these new photographs have come in, I'm going to update Enterprise by putting the actual photos, the digital photos up of this complex we call the apartments, because they're absolutely mind-boggling. And in the next break, when I have a few more minutes, I'm not trying to make some coffee here so that I don't lose my voice tonight, I'm going to send you, John, to your email, the direct JPL link to the photographs of the apartments. They just just released. And you will be absolutely boggled. I mean, you can see the resolution's almost good enough to see the rivets.
Damn it, man! Send them to me at once.
Okay. So,
send it to the Coast email address.
I'll repeat that info several times during the evening, because what we set up now for people who love video, we've got this free YouTube system called NASAFlix. You know, you can just type in NASAFlix into Google, and it will take you directly to NASAFlix. You don't have to go to Enterprise at all. But, of course, then you miss all the appropriate context that we're putting on the Enterprise website for how you can kind of look at this stuff and understand what it is you're seeing. And a lot of the junk images that I sent you tonight, John, they are in this video, you know, including that one that looks like a kid's sneaker.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. I've got it now. It does kind of look like a kid's sneaker.
Yep. Except
that might be a little bit of a stretch.
If you look very carefully, you'll see there's like aluminum banding across the metatarsal, which is that front of your foot.
Yeah.
That goes from your ankle down to your toes.
It does look like it has a sole on it, too.
Doesn't it? I think this was part of space gear. I think this might have been a boot as part of a spacesuit. But again, you don't have to know what it is to know that it's not a rock. And how do you know it's not a rock? The symmetrical aluminum banding. You know, nature does not produce symmetrical aluminum banding. I've never gone out in the woods and encountered a tree with symmetrical aluminum banding on it.
Okay, I've got the shattered sphere now. Now, that does not look like anything else that's anywhere near it. And say, why is it for the longest time, it seemed, those Mars pictures just had a red or really rich pink cast to them, and now they don't have that so much? Is that just...
No, what we've done is we've corrected the color to where it's real, because NASA's been lying about the color. For 40 years, NASA's been lying to us about the color. Why? Because they've done everything they can to keep the average, ordinary American taxpayer who's funding all this from knowing what they really found.
Oh, man, it's the red planet. Look, it's red.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the story that goes with this, I was at JPL Live covering it for, let's see, who was I covering it for then? I was back covering it for American Way magazine. Remember American Way magazine from American Airlines?
Oh, yes.
And I was friends with the editor, and she and I wanted to do some really cutting-edge stuff. American Airlines magazine, the American Way magazine, had a readership of 2 million people. And it was the most quintessential of captive audiences, because you're sitting there at 30,000 feet, right, bored to tears in a 707, and there's no place you can go. So what do? You read the articles in the magazine in the seat pocket in front of you. So I was able to talk to and lay out things in American Way that I wasn't able to do for years afterwards until, Art called me up one day and said, would you like to do my show? And that was the beginning of, as they used to say, a beautiful friendship. So I was at JPL for American Way covering in 76 the actual landing on Mars of Viking. And I was standing next to Sagan in the front lobby at dawn the morning following the landing, because what they had done in terms of procedure is they had taken a quick black and white snapshot with the cameras of the footpad. And the reason they did that was so they could see what the soil looked like and how deeply the footpad was embedded in the sand or soil or whatever. And if there were rocks kicked up, that was an engineering picture. It was designed to tell them that was the only picture they got back from Mars. If it disappeared like the Russians had tried to land on Mars during a dust storm, and they got 20 seconds of data, and then kaput, nothing came back further. So the procedure for Viking was, when you land, don't take a picture of the landscape, like play tourist. Take a picture of your feet, kind of like that sneaker. And the next set of pictures were a panorama with the line scan cameras scanning, rotating 360 degrees, it came in agonizingly slowly because the data rates back then were much lower than they are now because the antennas and power. I mean, technology has moved on, and in the 21st century, we can do a lot more with spacecraft than we could in 1976. The next morning, they had taken their first color picture. And all of us guys who, of course, had been up all night, who could possibly have gone to bed waiting for the first color picture of Mars. And I'm standing there in the lobby, which is where we had enough space to stand to look up at the monitors, because they used to have monitors hanging on crane-like thingies from the ceiling all over JPL, so you could see the mission data coming down live. The good old days before they would censor stuff. Anyway, so we're standing there with a bunch of newsmen and Sagan and me, and we're looking at this screen, and the color picture comes up. And it's got this reddish landscape and a powder blue sky. And we all gasp.
I bet.
Sagan says, "It looks like Arizona." And within hours, by a directive from Jim Fletcher, who was the NASA administrator in Washington at that time,
yes,
he had sent a directive to JPL, and they had technicians going around changing the color on all the monitors so that the Mars image appeared totally red. And the son of one of the principal investigators, one of the scientists on the mission, who was actually attached loosely as an intern. I mean, can you imagine as a high school kid spending your summer exploring Mars and getting credit for it for school?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd be nice.
He watched this procedure, and he went around following the technician and turning the monitors all back. And they arrested him. They took him up to the director's office, JPL, sat him down, and read him the Riot Act because he had strayed beyond the boundary. They basically kick him off the project and send him back with the tail between his legs to his high school. And you can imagine how that kid felt, with his peers. And he couldn't explain what really happened because the policies were so arcane. But that was the lengths to which they were going to, literally at dawn on the morning the first color picture from Viking came in, to suppress the fact that Mars looks Earth-like. And we have been stuck with these fiddled, finagled, fake red images for 40 years. So
I got a quick
on
one for you, Richard.
Mission, for some reason, which has to do with higher-level arcane politics, I think behind the scenes, moving toward disclosure, NASA has put out two versions of the images. One version, which is reddish or caramel colored or sickly green or whatever absurd, nonsensical color you can project on an image of another planet. But the other version is what they call white balanced, how Mars would look like if it was seen from an Earth-like sun illumination.
Okay.
Which, of course, is simple gobbledygook code for the fact that Mars is illuminated exactly by the same sun we are. It just happens to be 1.5 times farther away from the sun, so the light level is a little bit dimmer. It's like a bright, cloudy afternoon. And the cameras, of course, are so sensitive that they don't even see the difference in light intensity. And if you landed on Mars and walked around for a few minutes, you wouldn't even notice that it was a slightly dimmer landscape than it is in Arizona.
Unbelievable. All right, let's take our hard break here, and when we come back, I want to find out if you're getting any external pressure to curb your enthusiasm for this kind of research. We're speaking with Richard Hoagland tonight, an interview I've looked forward to for a long time. Delighted to be in with you tonight, John B. Wells, and Coast to Coast AM, we shall return. Thank you very much. Well, this overdue interview with Richard Hoagland tonight is most enjoyable. I hope you are enjoying it as well. If you want to ask a question via email or something, we'll take a few calls later on for sure. But just shoot it to me at johnb@coasttocoastam.com, JOHNB as in Bravo, @coasttocoastam.com, and I'll pass it along to Richard. We'll be right back with Richard Hoagland and more of this Martian guff on Coast to Coast AM. Richard Hoagland, all this global warming thing. A couple of people have asked about global warming on Mars, and then I started thinking, didn't we just hear about really thick ice layers on Mercury, and how is that possible with its proximity to the sun? I mean, isn't this data just sort of all over the place?
Several things to sort out. But before we do that, I was able now in the break to see you this link to JPL to this close-up Mastcam 100 image of the apartments. And my colleague has just sent me, his name is Greg Ahrens, he's done some amazing work with me in years past and is going to do more. Just a hint, Greg. He just sent me the whole set of links to all the raw images posted on the JPL site tonight of this area as part of this super panorama that they will ultimately use software and stitch together as this amazing 360 view of what it would be like if you were standing on Mars. It's in color. It's high res. The JPEG artifacts are non-existent, which is very interesting. And when you look at this, there is no doubt in my mind or in the mind of the engineering talent I've been able to call upon tonight as we're doing the show. I'm frantically typing. By the way, Robin called me and said, or she emailed me and said she never takes a bad picture. So I need to put that out there for the record, okay? Anyway, you need to look because I want your opinion live on the air.
Richard, I hate to interrupt you, brother. I hate to interrupt you, but let me ask you something. Are you on a cordless phone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong phone. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, we're good now because we're losing about 10% of it. And I thought,
that's terrible. We can't have that.
No, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I had to go and get a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and I took the portable so I wouldn't miss the break. And I'm so used to talking on it, I just kept talking on it. Anyway.
Look, I look for my phone, and I'm talking to somebody on it. I understand how that goes.
So look at your email and bring up that link, click on it, and then put it in Photoshop or something, and then zoom in to about 150. And then just scroll back and forth across these. They look like something you would have seen in Arizona or New Mexico by the side of the road in the 50s, alongside Route 66, a motel with everything blown out, glass is gone, nothing but the concrete supports and the beams and whatever, and the fronts and the sides of the building sticking out of the hillside. And someone tonight, a guy whose name is Gary, doesn't tell me his last name, who has a ranch, he says he's seen this kind of stunning detail in natural sedimentary geology layers on his ranch. I'm going to have him take a picture and send it to me. I guarantee you it's not what he's ever seen on his ranch. Unless he has a ranch with an old motel sticking out of the hillside.
I'm looking at a picture right now. It's labeled Egg on Action Man Enhanced.
Oh yeah, that's one. Someone sent that to me.
You know what that looks like being fanciful here. Now, I think maybe the sneaker might be a little bit of a stretch because because I can make it look like all sorts of things if I just stare at it for a few minutes. But this thing here, this is another one of those objects that does not look like anything else around it at all. And it looks to me like a gourd with a hole cut in it. And it looks like there's from the nose down, like a skull.
Well, first of all, it's black. And the rest of the stuff around it is not.
No, that's what I'm saying. It stands out big time.
Yeah, and it's knobbly. In other words, it's not smooth. It looks dented.
Those look almost like some ghastly teeth. It almost, I don't know,
okay,
it looks like a head laying there with a primitive helmet on it.
Think geometry. There seems to be a pipe sticking out of the front toward the camera, and then there's a nice little square flange to the right of that pipe on what looks like a bright aluminum substrate. It's like aluminum color. It's pretty small. That's why you have to put it in a viewer and magnify it, zoom in to see some of the detail.
Well, all of this stuff stands out from everything around it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that's for certain.
If you have a high-tech civilization, and we don't know how high, but I and Joseph Farrell and others have been speculating based on the data that these guys were at least probably equivalent to Michio Kaku's, Type 2 civilization. basically almost godlike compared to what our capabilities are. And they built lots and lots and lots of stuff. I mean, you can't go anywhere on Mars without finding something that doesn't look like a rock. If you have a planetary catastrophe, if that level of capability, which is, basically controlling the energies of the entire star of the solar system, the energies equivalent of the sun, by which you could use it to rearrange planets, move orbits of satellites, of asteroids, comets, move moons around. I mean, that level of capability is essentially godlike. And it came, from this Russian Kardashev, who was a protege of one of the famous Russian astrophysicists named Shklovsky back in the 50s, who wrote with Sagan a book called Intelligent Life in the Universe, in which they freely speculated about the super civilization that may have lived on Mars and actually ejected into orbit the moons of Mars as artificial world-class satellites, 10, 20, 30 miles across. If you look at this junk as the remnants of that level of civilization destroyed in a cataclysmic paroxysm which almost destroyed Mars. I mean, if you blow up a planet in somebody's front yard, it's going to do some damage. That's what we think happened to Mars circa 65 million years ago, which is not coincidental to when the dinosaurs bought it. It's all part of a big picture that someday I'm going to all put together with the documentation and the links and the references and the science and the papers, and it's going to be called The Heritage of Mars, Remembering Forever. That's the ultimate sequel to the Monuments of Mars. Anyway, if you look at this junk as the destroyed remnants of that kind of super civilization that then was shattered by shock waves, buried under megatons of mud and sediments and ground-up rock and stuff falling from the sky that literally piled up miles of debris, of pulverized planet falling from the sky at the speed of escape from Mars, which is, several miles per second. And then it's eroded by millions of years of wind and sandblasting and desiccation and endless erosion. What you're seeing, we think, in front of this rover as it's roving along is the reemerging debris of that incredible planetary-wide cataclysm in this place called Gale Crater, which is about 100 miles across, and which appears to have been like Los Angeles with wall-to-wall suburbs, and we're just rolling along. I mean, think of the worst nightmare scenario of a nuclear war from the 50s and multiply it by a factor of 1,000. And you get a hint of the catastrophe we could be looking at.
Yeah, I've got your picture here of the mars.jpl.nasa.gov. I've sent the link to Sean Deducere at Running the Web tonight, and then we'll see if we can get him up on coasttocoastam.com.
Okay.
Richard, I got to tell you, what scale is this supposed to be that we're looking at? I see horizontal ledges.
Yep.
At what range was this taken?
It's about 100. It's about half a football field away. You're looking at a section which is maybe 10, 20 feet long there, because you're only looking at the edges of a much bigger structure buried under the cliff.
And well, let me ask you this: the one that appears, the two horizontal, let's just call them ledges that stick out. Mm-hmm. The big one right there in the middle, pretty much the middle and slightly to the right of center.
Yep.
How wide do you estimate just that not the broken piece in the middle, but from end to end? How can you even hazard a guess at what the width of that is?
Well, we don't have to hazard a guess because I've had Greg doing calculations in trigonometry, for the last week. So we know exactly. That section there is probably 5-6 feet long.
5 or 6 feet long.
Now, what you want to look at...
Okay, so these are literally just remnants, because it looks like they're screening. I mean, these look like little miniature barbed wire fences that are inside there.
Doesn't it? It's a tiny fragment sticking out of something so much bigger that's still buried.
Well, if that's only 5 feet wide, this could be a piece of an ancient Martian air conditioner duct.
Could be. Now, what you want to do, you see the verticals? You see the things that are sticking straight up and down, and they're bent?
Yes, on both of these pieces, and they're broken in the middle, so it's obvious that it was done deliberately.
Well, but you see, geology doesn't do that. You don't have these very regular, they look like fence posts, if we want to make another analogy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like, a small barbed wire fence post with really thick barbed wire, and there are three strands of it going horizontally.
And then you've got a lid on top, which is, and you've got detailed structure in that lid. See, you see the banding and the horizontal stuff in that, what I would think of as a roof.
Yes.
And some of it is better preserved, some of it is really not. And then around it, there's a whole bunch of other junk, which also has incredible geometry on it, which looks like broken cornices and shattered blocks of masonry. And in other words, what happens when high-tech stuff falls into ruin? There was a TV show on, I forget whether it was History or Discovery, which has been running for the last 3 years, called Life Without People. And they go through a scenario where we all disappear, kind of like wish fulfillment on some producer's part. And you then go through the clock. You start the countdown clock. How long would it take for various man-made structures that we recognize? The Empire State Building, the Kremlin domes, the Onion domes, near Red Square, the Eiffel Tower, Hoover Dam. How long would it take before they're unrecognizable lumps? And on Earth, with our atmosphere, with 20% voracious oxygen, which, oxidizes everything almost overnight, it just takes a few hundred years until things are almost unrecognizable. And in 10,000, you could land in New York and you would not see anything but trees. Now, if you burrowed into the ground, into the detritus, into the layers, most of New York is underground. You know that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that would be better preserved than the stuff on top. And if there was some erosive process, of course, New York's not a good example because it's basically flat. But think of a city in, let's say Albuquerque, where we have things built on the hillsides, lots of architecture on the hillsides. If the hillsides slump down and cover that, and then erosion comes along because you have what are called depositional cycles and then erosive cycles in climatology and planetology, if you erode out high-tech structures, what you would see would be like the tip of the proverbial iceberg, just the edges peeking out of something that is much, much bigger, still buried. And the reason we know it's buried is you see all that very flat-looking, uniformly featureless stuff in between these ledges?
Yes.
That's the sand. That's the detritus, which is being eroded away, blown away by the wind, revealing what's underneath. This all in this model used to be mud, and it dried out. It's not thick enough to have turned into rock. And because Mars is desiccated now, and there's hasn't been a rainstorm in millions of years, what happens if you dry out mud? What does it do? It blows away, right?
And speaking of which, Richard, what happened to all those canals we heard about for years?
Well, those were geometric lines seen by Percival Lowell through relatively primitive telescopes. And when we sent spacecraft, the canals appeared not to be there. Although, if you look at photographs taken during the last couple of Mars oppositions by very sophisticated amateur telescopes, the canals appear to be coming back. There appears to be a geometric network in some places on Mars, not when you photograph it real up close with spacecraft. When you stand back far enough away, like Lowell did, but with modern high-tech CCD cameras and state-of-the-art, 14-inch Celestron telescopes, the imagery that we're seeing looks eerily familiar to what Lowell and the contemporary astronomers in the late 19th, early 20th century described, but could not photograph because they had hopelessly slow technology. And if you try to take a long-exposure picture of Mars through the Earth's atmosphere, it jiggles and wiggles and shimmers and totally distorts, and you don't get anything. But with super technology available now to amateurs that can take fractions of a second imagery and freeze the atmosphere, and with software stack only the images that are in perfect focus and sharp, they can reconstruct what the eye sees in a form that you can show anybody on an iPhone. And on those pictures, those latest Mars pictures taken at the last opposition, there are areas on Mars where the, quote, canals appear to be reemerging. So what could they possibly be? Well, if Mars goes through climatological cycles because the physics of the solar system is changing in long-term cycles, and there is, in fact, life on Mars, there is vegetation, and some of these so-called canals are really the surface indication of water leaking from a transport system underground, buried, that's leaking into the sands a little bit of moisture. And you know what happens in a desert? Plant life, microbes, cactus, whatever, will grow where there's water and will not grow where there isn't water.
What sort of atmosphere has Mars been determined to have?
Well, again, this is kind of contentious because you have the official NASA statements and estimates, and then you have some private investigators, some independent investigators who are finally challenging the official assertions.
Well, what I'm trying to get to is has any research been done? Well, I'm sure it's been done, but have any results suggested that there's actual weather present on the planet?
Yes, because we can photograph dust devils.
Okay.
Now, one of the problems is when NASA started sending spacecraft to Mars in the 60s and 70s. In 1971, we had Mariner 9 went into orbit. In 1964, we had the first flyby, Mariner 4. The readings that NASA gave us from those missions was that the Lowell atmosphere, which was like the high Tibetan Plateau in terms of pressure and temperatures and oxygen content, didn't exist. That in fact the closest analog to the Mars atmosphere in terms of pressure would be the Earth's atmosphere 100,000 feet up. You can't breathe 100,000 feet up.
No.
Even if you could, there's nothing there to breathe because, according again to the official statements by NASA, the Mars atmosphere is composed of 90-some% CO2 and just a smidgen of other things like nitrogen and, carbon monoxide and argon and, a couple of rare gases. But most of it is overwhelmingly carbon dioxide, which, of course, you would smother because you can't maintain biology in the presence of carbon dioxide. There has been a recent group, as I said a moment ago, of independent investigators who are challenging all of these official statements about the pressure and composition of the atmosphere of Mars. And they have assembled, and I'm actually going to post on Enterprise links to their papers, and I'm going to try to get one of these scientists to actually come on Coast, either with you or with George, to do an evening where they deconstruct, again, what's beginning to look like a nice set of very carefully constructed NASA lies about the environment of Mars. Now, let me start with something very simple. You live, in Dallas?
Sometimes.
Okay. Do you ever see a dust devil?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Dust devils in the Earth's atmosphere, you have circular winds. It raises dust in the desert, desiccated, no moisture to hold the particles together, and you get a basically dry tornado.
All right, Richard, going to have to hold it right there. Otherwise, I'll have to go blah, 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 because we have to take our break now. But let's take it up with dust devils, why they occur, and, well, just bring us back up to speed with what we're talking about, because a few of us are going to forget between now and the other side of this break, okay? Yes. Well, I'm just saying, this is Coast to Coast AM. Hey, Richard Hoagland, before we get too far away from that, we were talking about the presence of actual weather on the surface of Mars, and you said, yeah, because we can see dust devils. Then you started to tell us about dust devils, so just go ahead with that before we break again.
Here is the scientist reasoning. In order to raise a dust devil in a one atmosphere, like the planet Earth, using the Earth's atmosphere 15 psi as a standard, it takes a certain wind velocity and a certain air pressure to maintain the dust devil against the force of gravity. The only thing keeping those dust particles in the air is the upward lift of the swirling, circulating, air currents, the vorticity, against the force of gravity. So you can do an equation, how much mass can a wind of a certain density and pressure and velocity hold up in the air against gravity, which is trying to pull all the particles back down to the ground.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay. So they took the same equations and actually laboratory data, which was done by NASA itself at the NASA Ames laboratory, and they plugged into this simulation, this actual, it wasn't a computer simulation, it was an actual, vacuum tank test, and they took particles of the composition and size of the dust and sands on Mars, which are known from all the rovers and all the missions, and they took the air pressure as given them from every mission from Viking up through Curiosity, and they plugged all this into this vacuum tank, and they set up an experiment where they blew air at 1/100th the surface pressure of the Earth at higher and higher velocities across this, basic dish, huge dish, several, feet across of dust, like talcum powder, in an effort to get the air pressure equivalent of the Mars atmosphere to raise a dust devil. And guess what? They couldn't. Under the state, look, science is theory and observation, right? And observation has to trump theory every single time. You can't fool Mother Nature. You can't cheat the universe. If you can't get the universe to do, in practical, mechanical, experimental terms, what your theory says it's doing, then that's not what it's doing. NASA Ames could not reproduce below wind speeds that have never been recorded by any of the spacecraft that have ever landed on Mars, because they've all had little, meteorological stations, or at least most of them, measuring pressure and temperature and wind speed and all that. And the highest wind speed, Viking, which measured for years, they were nuclear-powered spacecraft long before the Curiosity rover, which is also nuclear-powered, so it should be going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny, and giving us really cool stuff if politics gets sorted out. The Vikings were nuclear-powered, so they were able to give us like a year or two of data, continuous. The highest wind speed that was present in any of the Viking measurements in the Martian atmosphere was 58 miles an hour. The lowest wind speed that Ames was able to make a dust devil was 80, almost 90 miles an hour. Viking never measured a wind speed approaching what you would need to create a dust devil under the current published data given to us by NASA of the density and pressure of the Martian atmosphere.
Oh, boy.
Now, this goes hand in hand with the weird fake color. If you have a concerted program being mandated by the banksters because they don't want to upset the boat where they run everything and they keep resources limited and they make trillions, and we peons, the 47%, the takers, are forced to live at their behest. If you don't want to disturb that nice little, con game you've got going, then one of the things you will do is you will lie about what NASA's really found on Mars, because if it ever came out that there was this stunning super civilization, which is the great-great-great-great-grandmothers of us, and there's super technology available just for the asking that can make oil obsolete, coal obsolete, environmental degradation obsolete, feed, clothe, and house every person on this planet, give them as much stuff as they want without leaving a heavy footprint on the land, they have lost control. Ultimately, it's all about the technology and science and who we used to be and what we used to do. And as I'm getting a million requests here for people asking me, how can we see these pictures? How can we see these artifacts? Well, let me jump to that again. Otherwise, I'm going to get totally slammed here. Go to enterprisemission.com. Click on the link, the big banners at the top about the new videos, and click on the one on the left, which is the Curiosity stealth mission, which is the really cool pictures from this mission up to a certain point. I mean, you're not going to see everything we're talking about tonight because they've taken more pictures and we downloaded them, and we're going to put them up in new stuff that I'm going to post in the next, few weeks. But at least you'll get a real feeling for what the mission has been secretly photographing that NASA is not telling you about publicly. What they're doing is they're putting it out there without comment. Well, John, one of the things that really bugs me is that we live in a society where unless an authority figure tells you what you're looking at, nobody has the guts to stand up and say, hey, there's junk on Mars. Somebody made that.
Yes, it's just a little bit. Let me ask you something. I got a question for you that's been bugging me for a while, and that is Buzz Aldrin. Now, Gordon Cooper mentioned a little saucer over by an airbase where some people were already filming, and they just went over there and filmed the thing doing that, and of course the film disappeared after he turned it in.
I think it was here at Kirtland in near Albuquerque.
Yes, and then Buzz Aldrin said, wait till people find out that there's a monolith, this thing that's 7 kilometers long, something like that, 700 feet, something.
No. It's about a third the height of the Washington Monument.
Okay, well.
But it looks brand new. It looks.
Yeah, he says, wait till people find out about this. But nobody's.
There are photographs. There are photographs on the Enterprise mission website. There's photographs on NASA websites. There's, just Google. Google is your friend. Google monolith on Phobos, and you'll have a zillion images, including some done by some of my colleagues, where they really did proportional scaling. They did size geometry estimates from the trigonometry of light shadows and all that.
Yep.
We know what this thing, and it's exactly on the face of Phobos. Phobos, let me back up.
Is Phobos the monolith that Aldrin referred to?
Yeah, the monolith is on Phobos. Phobos is the inner moon of Mars.
Oh, it's on Phobos. Okay.
On Phobos, it's about a third. It's about a little over 150 feet tall, and maybe 50 feet wide. It's not.
And there's a good picture of this somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Stunning picture with shadows.
Okay.
And it's flat on top. I think it's the elevator. I think somebody in a later epoch of civilization built this elevator on the side of Phobos facing Mars. So that's where we need to go and land if we want to get down inside Phobos and see what's in there.
Okay.
But that's just my speculation because...
All right. I'm at your website, enterprisemission.com. Where do I go to see this?
You have to Google.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Google Mars monolith, and it'll turn up a zillion pictures.
Okay. Google is my friend. Yep. All right. We're going to take our little break here and come back with Richard Hoagland and talk about some more of this stuff. I've got some more questions to ask you, Richard, and about some other stuff. We'll take a couple of side trips and maybe a few calls, too. This is Coast to Coast AM. So, Richard Hoagland, what do we think this monolith is? I mean, I know we don't know, but what's your guess? I mean, I'm just trying to tie that. Some of these images that I've gotten from you, like this pyramid with the pink beam going straight up. The children are in front of it. I'm going, okay.
Okay, let's not get into that now because we won't have time to do a decent job on it.
No, I get you, but I'm just saying, putting all this together, monoliths on Phobos and beams firing up out of Mayan ruins and so forth, it's like 2012 approaching and all that. I want your take on 1221, too, if you'd like to give it later.
Yeah, of course. Let me finish, because I'm getting slammed if you want to know how to find these images. Go to the Coast website, click on my name, follow the links that Sean set up. You'll find the video link at the bottom of that page he set up. That takes you to the NASA Flix YouTube area where our stuff is being displayed, totally for free, like watching television. Click on the Curiosity Stealth Mission link, and that will show you the latest stuff that we published from a conference a couple weeks ago in Los Angeles, the Conscious Life Expo, that shows this stuff we're talking about, the man-made junk, I use the term man-made in quotes, that's lying all around the rover and just driving across the surface of Mars, ostensibly looking at rocks. The other thing you can do is to simply go to nasaflix.com directly. That'll take you to the same data. Or you can go to enterprisemission.com. And at the top of the main page, right under the Now Hear This banner, you'll find a couple of video screens. Click on the left one, which takes you to Curiosity stealth mission, and you'll see these pictures. Now, has Sean been able to post the direct link from JPL I sent to you with the apartments on JPL they released tonight?
I'm looking right now, so I'll be able to get that for you in just a second.
Obviously, you should put it on my page.
Yes. Okay.
This is a link directly to the official NASA JPL Curiosity mission website, to the raw image file. You can't get more squeaky clean honest than that. This is data right from the horse's mouth, and it's stunningly clean data. If you look at it, if you put it into a program like Photoshop and then blow it up 150, 200%, you'll see that there are no artifacts from JPEGing, and there's stunningly clear ruins visible, geometric. I love, John, your description of, horizontal barbed wire with vertical fence posts.
Yeah.
With a lid on top and the soil on the bottom.
That's what it looks like.
Because what we're looking at is just Robin calls them. Let me look at the email she sent me. She says, still looks like ventilation shafts to me, which is an excellent idea. If you have a huge structure, think of the weather, Mount Weather, back during the nuclear war era where we had duck and cover and all that. Remember how they had an area where they were going to take the Congress underground under some hotel in West Virginia?
Yes.
And they had bunkers, and they had filtered ventilation going to the surface. They had a huge complex that could hold hundreds of congressmen underground for like a year. Think of it. I mean, I don't think that's what this is, because I think it was something that was on top and then got buried and is now being exhumed by the erosional properties of the Mars atmosphere. Incidentally, if the Mars atmosphere is denser and than we think it is and made of different stuff, that totally changes the time constants for how long this stuff has been eroding out from the sides of these canyons. Everything is dependent on getting accurate data. When you have one government agency in total control of everything coming back from Mars. Remember the Outer Limits TV show where they say, we control all that you see and hear?
Yes.
That's our problem with NASA. For the last 40, 50 years, they have controlled everything that we see and hear, and the more and more that we begin to get data from the honest folks who are either leaking this stuff tonight so that we talk about it, which is one scenario that is not totally out of bounds, or it's part of a timed release aspirin plan of disclosure where we don't release the good stuff until 2012 because they believe there's some religious ritual they're following that mandates 2012 is the year when we all get pregnant on this. Regardless, we've got better and better data, but we have no official comment. So it's almost like they're putting this out there for intelligent people who can make up their own minds to look at it and say, we've been lied to.
Yes, that's disturbing.
Or it is very, very encouraging. Because
Yes.
what it means, John, is that ultimately our fate is in our hands. And if enough people make a decision in this still fragile republic to do something, to concertedly get together and make a different set of choices, things change. It's ultimately up to us. We ultimately get exactly the government that we want. And it's when enough of us are fed up and do something different that we get something different. And not until then. Not 1 millisecond before then.
How much of the UFO thing do you involve yourself with?
I hate UFOs.
Because?
Because most of them are fake. Again, the government has totally screwed up all the UFO data going back to the 1940s. And the reason that I got into the whole artifact trip, looking at ruins, looking at NASA imagery of things on other planets that look like they're artificially intelligently designed, is because ultimately ruins stand still. I had an engineer friend who he used to be, and I'm going to get his title wrong here, he was the chief engineer that helped build about half of the L.A. airport. I sent him the image that I sent to you of the apartments about an hour ago?
Yep.
Let me read you what he says. The geometry is unmistakable. The roof lines, columns, multi-level. Geometry has no political agenda and doesn't lie. The lines are simply the lines. That's why I have eschewed ufology, because way back when I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, a young kid not tried behind the years, youngest curator of astronomy and space science in the country when I was 19, there was a big sighting of UFOs somewhere over the Midwest, near an Air Force base. And the Air Force came out with the most outrageous set of lies about what it was. They claimed it was the constellation of Orion. Well, this was the days before computers and the Internet and astronomy simulation programs, but I happened to work at a planetarium, so I was able to actually set up in the planetarium, which is a big analog computer. I had my own private analog computer, right? So
And
I
show the motion.
The time of when the sighting took place and the Air Force claimed it was Orion. Guess what?
Yeah.
Orion was on the other side of the damn planet when they claimed it was Orion. So I realized quickly that doing anything with ufology, with a field that was so thoroughly infiltrated by the intelligence agencies, by the disinformation crowd, by the egocentric idiots who come out there claiming this or that because they just want their name in print or they want to sell books or they want to be on television, that there would be no hope ever of getting to the bottom of the truth in that cesspool. So I turned my back on ufology and I went into something, not planning to, decades later, where we actually have stunning data tonight that stands still. You can put it on your computer screen. It comes from an official source, and it looks like the entire history of the solar system that we've been talking about, that we've been told about for the last 50 years, is flat, you blank, wrong. And that.
So you're not saying they don't exist. You're just saying the data's corrupted on the UFOs.
You can't get a handle, John, on truth about a phenomenon if you can't trust the data.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got a point, Richard.
I mean, that's
Certainly
a personal
do.
decision I made. Now,
Well, that's okay.
recently, I have come to realize a higher level to this problem. Because everybody thinks UFOs, they think aliens, right? Little green men from Alpha Centauri or God knows where, Zeta Reticuli, there's a million stories.
I got a picture of one with Nazi markings on it. I'm looking at it right now.
That's the problem. I now believe, along with my colleague Joseph Farrell and a few other people like Rich Dolan, that we had a break with civilization of monumental, superhistorical proportions that took place at the end of World War II. And we had a top-secret Black Ops program led by a German Nazi general named Kammler, who took all the really cool stuff and disappeared God knows where, including experiments in torsion field physics and anti-gravity, that 60, 70 years later now, this separate breakaway civilization, as Dolan has called it, has developed from Earthmen, right from this planet 70 years ago, a parallel technology which is so close to some of the super science that we think we're looking at as ruins on Mars, that they basically are calling the tune. And a lot of the weird decisions about our space program that seem to make no sense, that seem to be counterintuitive, totally non-productive, are not what any great nation would normally do, basically give up and go home and put their tail between their legs, can be explained if, in fact, we've been told to stay home, not by aliens or by Morella, who just barked at me, but by this Nazi faction that took this technology and basically ran with it, and it had 70 years of independent parallel technological civilization to basically keep us down on the farm.
All right, you heal that puppy, give him a biscuit, and we'll be back with Richard Hoagland and your telephone calls right after this break. This is Coast to Coast AM.